Okay, so we've been working on dividing decimals by whole numbers the last couple days. Today I want to show you how to divide a decimal by a decimal. And you're going to see, again, it's very simple if you could just get it. Keep in mind what we have to have before we can do this, okay? We have to have our divisor as a whole number before we can divide. That's just the bottom line rule. If you have a decimal divided by a decimal, that divisor, which is outside the little division house, has to be a whole number. So if you notice what I have here, your goal is to get your divisor to a whole number before you can divide. To do that, move the decimal to the right as many times as you need to in order to make it a whole number. And as we've talked about with fractions, when we talk about doing the same thing to the numerator and the denominator, we talk about being fair. It's the same way in decimal division. Do the same thing in the dividend. That's only fair. So this particular problem here on this page, 15 and 78/100ths divided by 3 and 6/10ths. Before I could even begin to divide this problem, I would need to take the decimal in the problem and move it one place to the right, and do the same thing in the dividend. So in the divisor, I moved it one place to the right. In the dividend, I move it one place to the right. So now my new problem would be 36 into 157 and 8/10ths. So there's this preliminary step that you have to do before you can divide a decimal by a decimal. So notice I've changed this now into dividing a decimal by a whole number, which you know how to do. You just bring that baby up and you divide like usual. So let's think about that. When we move the decimal to the right, what are we really doing? Think about it. In this problem here, when I moved this to the right, didn't I just multiply that by 10? And so in order for this problem to be accurate, I have to do the same thing here. I'm going to multiply that by 10. So I went from 15 and 78/100ths to 157 and 8/10ths. So when you think about it, we're moving the decimal, absolutely, but what we're really doing is we're multiplying by 10. And what you need to remember with decimal division is how many ever times it takes to move the decimal in the divisor, you have to do the same thing in the dividend. Otherwise, you're not working the same problem as the original problem. So my quotient for this problem, 157 and 8/10ths divided by 36, is going to be the same quotient for this original problem, 15 and 78/100ths divided by 3 and 6/10ths. Okay, so let's practice a couple. I want to show you what this would look like. We have 3 and 48/100ths divided by 5 and 8/10ths. Remember, your number one goal in decimal by decimal division is to make your divisor a whole number. So in order to do that, I've got to grab this decimal and move it one place to the right. It makes my 5 and 8/10ths is now 58. So I multiplied by 10. But I've got to come over here into the dividend and do the same thing. Move this decimal over one place as well. So I'm going to always ask you to rewrite your problem once you've done that. If you try to work on this problem that you've written on, it gets very confusing. So my new problem now is 34 and 8/10ths divided by 58. So now just like you would do decimal division by a whole number, bring that baby up. I know 58 does not go into 34, so it looks like I'm going to have a one-digit divisor here, or I'm sorry, one-digit quotient here. So 58 goes into 34 and 8/10ths. What I'm going to look for is what can I multiply by 8 that would get me an answer that ends in 8, and I'm thinking 6 immediately. So let's try it. 6 times 8 is 48. Put down your 8, carry your 4. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 4 is 34. And that works out perfectly. So I know the answer to 5 and 8/10ths into 3 and 48/100ths is 6/10ths. Okay, let's look at this one. Same goal. I need a whole number divisor, so I'm moving one to the right in my divisor, one to the right in my dividend. Let's go ahead and rewrite the problem. So now my problem is 68 and 9/10ths divided by 13. Okay, bring that baby up. 13 goes into 68. I know 5 times 13 is 65, so that makes that pretty easy. 8 minus 5 is 3. Bring down. Remember, we're not worrying about the decimal here. It's gone. We've already brought it up here, so it's gone. 13 goes into 39 3 times. 3 times 13 is 39. My answer is 0, and I'm finished. So 6 and 89/100ths divided by 1 and 3/10ths equals 5 and 3/10ths. Okay, let's look at a problem that has a different divisor. It has more digits, so we have hundredths place versus tenths place. Same rule. We need that divisor to be a whole number. So I'm going to move 2 places to the right to make it a whole number, which means here I have to move 2 places to the right as well. So let's rewrite our number. When I look at it, it looks like my new number now is 10 and 4/10. Remember, there's no reason to write that 0 right there. Divided by 8. Okay, we don't need to write the zeros that are in front of the 8. Bring that baby up. 8 goes into 10 one time. 1 times 8 is 8. Subtract, bring down. Remember, I don't bring my decimal down. I've already put it up in the quotient where it belongs. 8 goes into 24 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. And I am finished. So 104 thousandths divided by 8 hundredths is 1 3/10. Okay, last problem. Let's do the same thing. This one we need to go ahead and write as a division problem, as a long division problem. So we have 36 and 8/10 divided by 25 hundredths. Okay, so number one goal, we need a whole number to divide by. So we're going to have to move our decimal 2 places to the right in the divisor, which means we move 2 places to the right in the dividend. Now remember, I didn't have a place to go here, so I had to add a place. So that's always going to be a 0. Always, always, always. So let's go ahead and add that 0 in. Now let's rewrite the problem. The problem now is 3,680 divided by 25. So now we just have whole number division. 25 goes into 36 one time. 1 times 25 is 25. Subtract, bring down. 25 goes into 18. I know 4 25s are 100, so I'll go ahead and go with what I know, a friendly number. And subtract, leaves me 180. 25 goes into 180. I know that, let's see, 5 quarters would be 125. 6 quarters, 150. 7 quarters would be 175. So let's go with 7. Remember, you can think of quarters. That makes it easy. So 7 times 5 is 35. 7 times 2 is 14 plus 3 is 17. When we subtract, we have a remainder of 5. Now, here's the deal. We don't really want to have a remainder when we're doing decimal division. So, as you know, this 3,680 right here really has a decimal at the very end. So I'm going to add that decimal and I'm going to just bring it up and I'm going to add a 0 after it because I need something to bring down here to finish this problem. 25 goes into 50 2 times. 2 times 25 is 50 and I now have 0 as an answer. So 36 and 8/10 divided by 25 hundredths is 147 and 2/10. Okay, so just as a quick wrap up, I want you to go back and remember that the first thing you have to do when you divide a decimal by the whole number is, and I hope you just said, bring that baby up, and then you divide just as normal. The second thing to remember is, when you're dividing a decimal by a decimal, the first thing you have to do is, and I hope you just said make that divisor a whole number, so you're going to move the decimal in the divisor as many times as you need to the right, but then you're going to do the same thing in the dividend. You're going to be equal. Move it how many ever times you did in the divisor, move it that many times in the dividend, and then you're going to rewrite the new problem because you will have a new problem at that point. What I would like for you to do tonight for homework is either you or someone at your house make up, kind of like we did the last time, make up a division problem. A decimal divided by a decimal. Show me that you know how to complete the steps in order to divide a decimal by a decimal. Now remember, we don't want to have remainders. When you're doing decimal division, you don't want to have R25 or R7. You need to add that decimal at the end and add zeros after it. Now, this can get hairy, and here's what our general rule is going to be. If you've added zeros twice, 3 times, and you're still not getting a 0 at the end when you subtract out your product, I want you to round that decimal place to the nearest hundredth. That's going to be our rule of thumb this year. So if you can go 3 places past the decimal. So add 3 zeros if you have to. If you still don't have 0 as an answer, a final answer, when you've multiplied and subtracted, go ahead and round. Using that thousandths place, round it to the nearest hundredths place. So I'm curious to see what kind of problems you come up with. Go back and watch if you need to again, but honestly, if you can just remember these rules, 2 different rules for dividing decimals by whole numbers and dividing by decimals by decimals, division will not be a problem for you. So one problem completely worked tomorrow, decimal by decimal. Have a good night.